welcome to Ask Earl Anything, number 33. This week, we've got a bunch of questions and lots of cool topics to talk about. Remember, this show is made up of your questions. You ask questions, I answer questions, we have a show. So we have another great show this week. I had a lot of questions this week, so let's start with the first question. And I believe the first question is going to be from Rich Raw Dog Drums. And his question is, which Paiste cymbals are comparable to the 2002s but are lower priced? Great question, Rich. Now, in the old days, the cymbals that were closest to the 2002s when I was a kid was the Paiste 505s. Now, Paiste 505s are highly collectible today. I actually have a Paiste 505 set of hi-hats, and I also have a Paiste 505 20-inch crash. It dates back to the 70s. It actually was owned by the drummer named Danny Gottlieb, who used to play with the Pat Metheny group back in the 70s. So it's a pretty cool cymbal. But today's modern day 2002 cymbals that are in the lower budget range would be the PST-7 cymbals. The PST-7 cymbals are the most like the Paiste 2002s. So it's got the red PST-7 on it, and from what I've been told and what I've heard online is they're probably the closest to the poor man's 2002 for the 2018 year. Yep, that's the ones. Those are the ones you want today. So Paiste PST-7s. I haven't played any, but yeah, definitely that's where you want to go, Rich. No doubt about it. So let's go to the next question. My next question comes from Bill Morehouse, and he has two questions. The first question is, only certain types of heads work well for brushes. What's the story with that? And then he had another question about heads. He said, what kind of heads are typically used on timbales? Seems like some kind of coated head maybe. I don't know much about drum heads. Well, Bill, great question. Brushes on a snare drum usually need a coated head, and the reason for that is the roughness of the head. Now, this is a more worn in head, and the more worn in it is, the softer the sound. This is a brand new head. You hear the rough sound of the head. So when we think about brush heads you need for brushes, usually think of coated heads. Now, clear heads can work for brushes, but I would put the clear heads on the toms. I always used to, when I use clear heads, I would use clear heads on the toms and still a coated head on the snare because I wanted that grittiness for brush playing. Okay. Now for timbales usually use a thinner head, something like ambassador weight or diplomat weight head. An ambassador weight head is 7 mils of plastic, and usually it's not coated. Usually it is a white mylar head. That's not even a Remo head. It's usually it's some head. I don't know who makes the heads for LP, but they are in the Remo head style, but it's a really thin mylar head is what they usually use on timbales. Now, I have seen timbales with coated heads, and I've seen timbales with clear heads. So you don't have to have a white plastic head on there. You can use a coated head or a clear head, but traditionally you want to go with a thinner head for timbales, because when you crank it up, you want to get a little bit more of that open ringiness out of a timbale. Timbales technically have like a really open metallic kind of sound. They're usually tuned up higher pitched. So if you're going to go for timbale heads, I would say that's where you want to start, or buy an LP timbale head. LP does sell timbale heads to go with their drums. So that might be another way to go. As far as coated heads for a drum kit, I would say you need it on a snare drum more than anything else for brush playing, because most of your brush playing is going to be on the snare drum versus on the toms. And if you're just hitting a tom like that, it's not going to matter if it's plastic or not. So if it's a clear plastic, it's not going to matter. They're all plastic heads, but this coating is a special substance they put on it to get the grittiness, that gritty sound. Okay? Hope that helps, Bill. Great question, though. Awesome question. Next question comes from Lee Zoe. And he said, another great video. Earl, I have a question about bass drum muffling. I know exactly how much to dampen my toms and snare but when it comes to bass drum, I'm just guessing. What do you use? Pillow, towel, felt strips, nothing. And do you use the same method for all situations? I like my bass drum wide open and think it sounds great when we play gigs. And the sound guy always comments how boomy the bass drum sounds. I end up putting a muffling pillow inside. Well, what you're going to find with sound engineers, Lee, is that sound engineers like a deader sound. And a lot of my studio recordings, on a lot of the songs I play, I have a pillow touching the back head. For a couple months earlier this year, I was using a Remo Ambassador bass drum head, which is a really thin bass drum head. And I had it on my 20-inch kick drum, my Gretsch 20, and it basically had a pillow lodged against it, and it was like, had a real smack sound. You get a real lot of articulation and that staccato sound out of the bass drum that way. Now, a lot of guys don't like that sound, but a microphone loves that sound. And that's one of the things they realized in the 60s. One of the first guys to actually put pillows in his bass drum and really muffle it was Hal Blaine. Hal Blaine he took the whole head off the bass drum front. He had his system where he had some rubber in there and he kept the hoops on so that shell didn't go out around, but it was no head on the front, and he would stick a pillow leaning up against the back head. And that was that dead sound. I use that a lot on my 22 that's in the other room. I have used it on the kick drum on my 20-inch kick drum for my Gretsch drum, 20-inch. Now this bass drum has got an EMAT head on it. Now EMAT heads are my favorite for wide open playing. If I'm going to play a bass drum head wide open, meaning no muffling inside it, it's going to be the muffling on ring around the outside. And that's going to kill it enough to actually sound good to me. Now, with a kick drum, an 18-inch kick drum, and playing jazz, I'm trying to get a more round bass drum sound. If you want to get a more pointed, punchy attack bass drum sound, you want a pillow in the bass drum. What I'm doing with the bass drum on this particular brush playing exercise I'm doing here is I'm feathering the bass drum. I'm playing it lighter. And I'm pulling the beater off the head, and that's why I get that sound. You will get a different sound on your bass drum if you bury the beater. Okay? If you're doing more of a funk thing. So that's burying the beater versus pulling the beater off the head. Both have their place. Now, is it pillow? Is it a filled up bass drum? Is it a wide open bass drum? That depends on you, what your sound is. If you want to make a sound man happy, have a nice little hole in the bass drum front, put a pillow in it. They're going to stick a bass drum in there and you get that punch out of it. Your drum's going to sound killer out front, by the way. You know, through the PA it's going to sound killer, but it's not going to have that boomy feel that you get off of a wide open bass drum in your studio or your practice room. So it all depends on what you want. Now, sometimes when I played a wide open bass drum and I'm miking it in a studio, like if I have the bass drum wide open, even this little kick drum here for like a jazz thing, I will throw a pillow against the front head, against it, not in it. and it basically will do the same thing as kind of burying the beater. It'll deaden the head, the front head. The front resonant head affects the tone of the bass drum too. Now all my bass drums are 14-inch depth, so they're not really super deep. So I never get that super boomy bass drum out of it. But that's just me. That's the way I do things. That's the way I roll. But thank you for the question, Lizo. Thank you very much. The next question is from AR drummer Adam. And Adam asks, have you ever played Dream band? I can't read today for doo-doo, can I? Have you ever played Dream cymbals, Dream brand cymbals? And do you ever consider buying any in the future? Now, my only Dreams that I have in my studio is this 22-inch gong, and I think this 9-inch gong, which I think is outside the picture, the camera angle. Up here, because this is the head. Yeah, it's outside the angle. I'll show it to you. This is my little 9-inch gong. It's called an opera gong. It's got this like swing, swing versus my wind gong. They call that a lion roar gong. But these are the only Dream products I have in my studio. Now it's not because I haven't looked at them, Adam. I've actually looked at some Dream cymbals. The dark energy and the dark matter energy, I think they're called. The ones that are black almost, and then the ones that are kind of just dark. Dream cymbals come from Wuhan, China area. So they're actually made with the Wuhan, China gong alloy, which is a B20 alloy. It's just made differently than the Zildjian alloy. So they are cool cymbals. I'm very interested in the cymbals, to be honest. So I kind of like them. But they're different than the B20 of the Zildjians, which these are today. These are my Karopes. So would I think about buying some Dream cymbals? Sure. If I was in the market to buy some more cymbals, I would definitely think of Dream. Dream are really cool cymbals. They're different. They're a different sound. They're usually the darker ones, but they do have the brighter ones too. But again, very dark B20 alloy cymbals, Dream cymbals are. But I think they're really cool, and I love their gongs. Their gongs are really sweet. So, Jeff Holden asked a kind of geeky question, as he's put it. He says, in your opinion, is there a difference in sound between the old 1.6 mil hoops and the newer 2.3 mil? You'll also notice a difference between the older chrome over brass 1.6 and the steel. I told you I was kind of super geeky. Great show. Thanks for the plug. That was last week. By the way, Jeff had a great show this Tuesday with Little Drummer Channel, Jeremy and Nate. Great guys, great channel, and a great interview by Jeff on those guys. Check it out. As long as you don't have an iPad like I have that won't play the video. But I was able to watch it on the computer. Now, the question about the hoops. I think I've played some of the brass hoops because I had a set of Ludwig club dates from the mid 60s, and they might have still been making some of the brass ones. I know I played I think they were brass with nickel plating on them. And I thought those sounded great on those drums. I had the steel 1.6 mil hoops on my first Ludwig Vista-like, on all my Ludwig Vista-like kits. And I will tell you, the first drum hoop I ever broke was a 5.5 by 14 blue Vista-Lite snare drum that I was hammering down on it, rim shots, and I actually broke the hoop and it came apart. And I had to buy one when I was like 17 years old. So I was hitting so hard. So I didn't find a lot of durability in the 1.6 mil hoops. Now, all the newer drums starting in the 80s with Pearl and other, I don't know who started the craze in the 2.3 mil hoops, but those triple flange, most of the triple hip flange hoops today are 2.3 millimeters. And again, they're triple flange hoop sound. I don't have a triple flange hoop drum except for my rototoms in there. And so mine are all die cast. So I'm not really the authority on triple flange hoops. Of all my snare drums, I mean, my snare drums with triple flange hoops sound really cool, but they sound different than my ones with die cast. So I guess to answer your question, the 1.6 mil steels are not going to last long if you hammer them for a snare drum. If they're on a tom, they'll probably last forever. I don't know how they affected the sound because Vistalites sound like Vistalites to me. I mean, they're very bright and plasticky sounding. I haven't really had a lot of drums with the 1.6 mil hoops. Most of my drums since 1979 have had die-cast hoops on them, except for maybe that fiberglass 5s kit, and again, that had a different sound than the Vistalite kits. So, truthfully, I think from a durability perspective, I'd go with the 2.3 mils. From the sound perspective and tuning perspective, I like die-cast hoops on maple drums like the Gretsch hoops on the Gretsch maple drums. But I have played the Catalina Club series, and I think they sound great. And I don't know, I think they're using a 2.3 mil hoop on those. They sound fine. They're just really cheap finished drums usually. But those drums sound great. But they sound great because they're mahogany too, not just the triple flange hoop. So I guess that's my answer to your question, Jeff. Boy, I think my answers are pretty lame this week. So just leave it at that. All right, another question. This is from Andrew Muse. And Andrew says, any recommendations? He says, what's your opinion about crash ride cymbals? Any recommendations for versatile 20 or 22-inch rock for rock and R&B playing, in addition to the 18-inch Peisty Signature Fast Crash? I would like to keep my set as small as possible. Thanks in advance. The best 20-inch crash ride that I know is a Peisty Giant Beat 20 Multi, which I happen to have on my other kit. I just think it's a great crash ride cymbal. It sounds like a crash, and it sounds like an awesome crash, but it also sounds like an awesome ride. A little bit brighter. Now, these are crash rides. The Kropes are crash rides. All right? These are designed to be crash rides. But they're a little dark for a lot of pop playing. But then again, there's no rules today with drumming. So, this is a crash ride. What do you need to have a crash ride cymbal? You need a cymbal you can crash on, and you have a cymbal you can ride on. And usually the weights have got to be thinner, not heavier. This is why most of your Ping rides from the 70s are terrible crashes. You will find most of your great crashes are in a lower weight than your heavier Ping type cymbals or your heavy cymbals. So this Kerope right here is about 2360 grams. And I think this Kerope is a 19-inch, and I think it's... Actually, I'm not sure what it is exactly, so let's take a look at this one for a second. Oh, it's worn off. Well, I could weigh it, but it's definitely worn off the bottom. So, I think it's under 18. Might be 1,700 grams, something like that. But what you want in a crash ride is something that's a thinner cymbal. I'll tell you some other great crash ride cymbals today. The Zildjian Avidus line. They are made in the weights of the 60s Zildjian cymbals, and they're thinner. So the Giant Beat multis have got some great crash ride sounds. The 24 multi is a crash ride. The 22 multi is a crash ride, so Giant Beats are that way. The Big Beat series is a crash ride series. The Keropes and the Avidus line are all crash ride series. I am sure that the Sabian Artisan light rides or medium rides are probably in the crash ride vicinity too. that's what the company's been going towards. They've been going towards thinner ride cymbals, 20s and 22s, that give them that crashability so you can go either way with them. Okay? But my favorite for that pop genre stuff would be the 20-inch giant beat. I've taken the 20 and the 18 giant beat on gigs. Okay? Just those two cymbals and played a gig with a pair of hi-hats. So they're great cymbals, and I think they're in your wheelhouse of Peisty. Great cymbals. But the big beats will work too. All right, 2112 Drum says, I'm thinking of building a custom drum kit with Keller shells. What size drums do you think I should have? 10, 14, 20 or 12, 14, 20? All right, so if you're going with a 20-inch bass drum, I like the 10, 14 combination. But what I like even better than the 10, 14 combination is a 12, 16. Yep, the spread of a 12, 16 I think sounds better than the 10, 14 or the 12, 14. I think they're a little close. So I would recommend going with a bigger bottomy floor tom. And matter of fact, sometimes on my kit, you'll see me play 10, 16. All right, 8 by 10, 16 by 16. I have done 8 by 10, 14 by 14. This happens to be 8 by 12, 14 by 14. Okay, which is a great jazz sound. But I don't think the 14 by 14 has the depths that this one does. It's got nice range, you know, and I don't have them too jazzy sounding. But my favorite is that 16 floor tom. So 12, 16, great combination. And it's probably more versatile than 10, 14. So that would be my recommendation for you if you're going to build a kit. All right. But again, if I was going to build a kit, I'd build something with some crazy sizes. I'd go maybe 10 by 10, 10 by 10, 13 by 11, 15 by 15, 16 or 18 by 18 maybe. I'd actually love to have a square size kit. 10 by 10, 13 by 13, 15 by 15, 18 by 18. I've never had an 18-inch floor tom, so I'd like to have an 18-inch floor tom someday. And I've never had a 15-inch floor tom. I've had a 15-inch concert tom. But why would I do that? Because I'm just crazy enough to want something different than everybody else. Everybody's got 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. That's the sizes today. Steve Gadd turned that into the major special size kit. Now, I will tell you, when I had my 10, 12, 14, 16 toms back in the 80s, a lot of guys didn't have those sizes. But today, everybody's got them. Almost every kit comes in fusion configuration. 10, 12, 14. And the depth of the 14 isn't always a 14 by 14. I think it makes a big difference. A floor tom depth, square depth. Matter of fact, I think shallow toms, rack toms, and floor tom depth floor toms make killer sounding drum kits. And that's why still today, most guys want to have the shallow rack toms with real size floor toms. I just don't get this like shortening the floor tom size. That's something DW started doing and Yamaha started doing, and it was in reaction to their square size toms. I mean, if you find pro level drum kits in Yamaha, Tama, Pearl, if you find any of those in those pro range, pro drum companies, you're usually going to find, for cheap, you're usually going to find them in squared size power toms, because nobody wants square size power toms. But I've always wanted a 10 by 10. I think a 10 by 10 is a really cool drum. So, and if I could have a kit with a 10 by 10 and a 13 by 13 and a 15 by 15, that's a great five-piece kit. Maybe a little 18-inch deep bass drum. Maybe like an 18 on it. 18 by 18. So I could use a really deep, small bass drum with the big long toms and the floor tom. That would be a cool kit to me. But that's my fantasy kit. Haven't got it yet. I'm quite happy with the drums I have, though. I will tell you that. So, last one is from Steve Delamar. And Steve Delamar, Steve the drummer, says, My question to you is, what are your feelings about drum clinics, and have you been to any recently? Steve, I love drum clinics. I love being able to go to drum clinics. I've even done a few drum clinics in my career. I used to have this group called Drummers for Jesus right here in my studio. We met. And I would bring guys in to do a little small clinic to about 10 guys. And I've done some Drummers for Jesus events where I've done drum clinics 2 or 3 times. So that's a lot of fun. But as far as pro drummer drum clinics, I think the last one I went to was Danny Seraphin back in 2011, and that's because there hasn't been a lot of great drum clinics around here. I may be wrong about that. It may be Gerald Hayward I saw at Res Drums. I saw that one too. He was excellent. He was a great drummer too. But most of the drum clinics that I've seen have been down south, like Broward County or Miami County, Miami-Dade County, and it was years ago. The drum shops around here are just not doing the drum clinics like they used to do in the early 2000s. So since 2011 or 12, I can't think of Guitar Center doing a drum clinic down here in West Palm. They haven't done one. And there hasn't been a lot of drum clinics in this area. So that's to our detriment. But some places drum clinics are thriving, and if you can get to the drum clinic, go see them. I've seen some awesome drum clinics in my day. Okay, we got cut off on my Steve Delamar question about drum clinics. So let me wrap up the drum clinics question. I've got one more question after this. I've seen some really memorable drum clinics in my day. Danny Seraphin being one of them, where I won a drum cymbal. But some of my favorite clinics I've seen in my lifetime would be, I've seen David Garibaldi up close, Vinny Colaiuta up close, Dave Weckl. I saw Vinny at Modern Drum Fest in 2000 when he first became a Christian. That was an interesting one. Watching him play with his band, the one that's on that famous Modern Drummer 2000 Drum Festival, Modern Drummer Fest 2000 Drum Festival, yeah, where Vinny played his butt off that show. I've seen some great drummers. I saw Billy Ward after 9/11 in Kansas City, Missouri. So I've seen some great drum clinics, and ones that are really memorable to me, that I really enjoyed. So I'm all about drum clinics, Steve. It's just a matter of finding them today. I haven't found any good ones down here in a long time. So my last question comes from my friend Mike Frisano. And Mike says, well, let me read the question, the whole question. All right. So, I really like the end of the track. This is the end of the last Ask Earl Anything show. He said, I really like the end of the track where you air drum the cymbal rest to keep time for the actual hit. Or was it a tick? Now, Mike, as you all know, I make all these little references to Mike, and when I talk about my ticks, when I'm doing wiping stuff off my face or touching my ear or doing other things with my hands that I shouldn't be doing. But he thought last week I did this fill and I hit the cymbal. I kind of did an accent and then I hit the cymbal, and he thought that might have been a tick, but it wasn't a tick. It was my way of counting. Okay, so he finishes the question by saying, do you find a move, also known as a rest or a tick like that, helpful in keeping time for the song? He said, by the way, like my KZs, which I have up again. I didn't take them down from last week. I think when it comes to like keeping time in a song, if I have to play a rest, it's nice to have something for something moving in my body to keep that going. I wouldn't call it a tick, but I do think it's helpful to kind of counting rests, especially when you're reading music. Because you got to set up a big fill, and there's a rest first. That was simple, kind of stupid thing. I probably wouldn't do it for that one, but you get the idea of like counting out the time before hitting it. So I think we all have different ways of counting tempo and time, especially when we're not playing on click. When you're playing on click, you got that click going. But even when I got the click going, a lot of times I'll use my hi-hat. count time. And in a lot of church settings where there is a click, the MD on the gig will say play what they call overheads or cymbals. So you'll be playing just to keep the band going, because if the band doesn't hear the drums doing something, then a lot of times they get lost. But what I did on that fill was I hit a bass drum there. I just did something like that. So maybe I'll put that at the end of the show again, just to show the emphasis. And I actually did it on both versions. Last week I put a song called "Warm" on the end of Ask Earl Anything, and that was the stick version. The one that everybody saw on YouTube was the brushes version. And I did even that tick in the brushes version. It was a little more subtle than I went like this. But I do use different gestures to kind of count tempo so I know where I'm at. And I think it's effective in keeping your place in a song. So remember, what we're here to do is play music. And music is made up of notes and rhythms and harmonies and melodies. And one of the biggest things in music is rests. And I was watching, it's funny because I was watching a Drumeo this morning with Russ Miller. And he was talking about how drummers don't really know the difference between a whole note, a half note, a quarter note, a 16th note, an 8th note. Oh, we know, we can count them. But here's what we consider. This, he goes like this, he goes, this is a 16th note, this is an 8th note, this is a quarter note. We don't understand the length of the note is where he was going from this. So if the count is 1, 2, 3, 4, and I want to do quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4. The quarter note is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If it's a half note, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And see, horn players think about the length of the notes. We as drummers, 1, 2, 3, all right, let's do half notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sustain of the instrument is the note, but we're not doing anything. We're just hitting the 1, and the 3. 1, 2, 3. So if we're on something short, not a cymbal, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, we call that a half note. That's what we do. If it's quarter notes, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Still single hit. And that was his point was, we need to learn how to play like other musicians do, where they have to play the full value of the note. You end up playing the full value of the note when you're playing rolls or you're doing something with brushes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're working on that legato, you're thinking about the full value of the notes. And that's why I use ticks, like Mike Frisano called it, a tick like this, and then hitting the punch, because that was my way of counting. You know, I was actually counting it. So I will put that video at the end so you know what I'm talking about. Thank you for watching Ask Earl Anything. Your questions make the show. I hope you had a lot of fun watching the show this week. Please like, please subscribe, and thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.